Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ian Campbell with the ANTARA Group, and we are excited to be hosting our first webinar on what to look for when choosing a retail colocation provider. We'll be hosting a panel discussion between Tim Caulfield and Mike Vignato of the ANTARA Group and Mike Klein from Online Tech. The ANTARA Group is a group of senior-level IT executives focused on helping technology end users, infrastructure services companies, and investment groups make better decisions and optimize the return on their IT investments. With over 100 years of combined experience, the advisors that make up the ANTARA Group are a high-performance executive team dedicated to your organization's success. Online Tech is the Midwest leader in secure, compliant enterprise cloud, co-location, off-site backup, and disaster recovery services. The company's network of 5 data centers protect mission-critical applications to ensure that they are always available, secure, and comply with government and industry regulations. Backed by independent HIPAA, PCI, SOC2, and Safe Harbor audits, Online Tech delivers exceptional experiences for companies in need of a strategic hosting partner.
Good morning, everyone. Tim Caulfield. I'm the CEO and founder of the ANTARA Group. I have been in the sector since 2001, where I was with Exodus. And for those of you who have followed the sector, you probably know that Exodus became Cable and Wireless, which later became Savvis, which is now CenturyLink. Through Exodus, Cable and Wireless, and Savvis, I held a variety of senior executive roles. Left them in '09, founded a consulting company, left the consulting company for a CEO role with a regional data center provider down here in San Diego, and then in 2013 decided I wanted to work back in the consultancy space, and founded the ANTARA Group. And as Ian said, our focus is entirely on the data center, cloud computing, and managed services sector. And looking forward to the topic we have this morning. Mike, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Vignato. I've been in the sector since '97. A few companies I've worked for is Yahoo, Akamai, Via West. I owned and operated a regional data center in San Diego, Castle Access, for 10 years. I was also one of the founders of another data center company in San Diego, CL Matrix. Very excited about sharing our insider knowledge on the sector this morning with everyone. And I guess we have...
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, I was going to toss it over to Mike Klein, CEO.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Mike. This is Mike Klein. I'll say good afternoon because I'm on East Coast time. We're headquartered up here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Just a little bit about Online Tech and the kind of the perspective that I'm bringing to this panel today. Ian said this, we're a Midwest hosting company focused really on 3 things: compliant, secure, enterprise-grade hosting. Focused across the, as I said, the Midwest. We've got 5 data centers, about 160,000 square feet, sitting across all 5 data centers. And probably as we start talking about co-location, you're going to see me bring a little bit different perspective, because we do more than just co-location. We also do, a lot of our clients are running in our multi-tenant cloud and in our private cloud. We don't play in the public cloud space. We're not trying to compete with Amazon. We're more focused on the mission-critical applications, where that security, that compliance, and that enterprise-grade hosting is really the drivers behind the clients that come to us, whether it be co-location, multi-tenant, or the private cloud world. So a little bit about Online Tech, and we'll hand it back over to you, Ian.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. So as I mentioned, we're going to host this as a panel discussion. Currently, we have about 15 questions or so that are being we have about 15 questions or so that have been submitted so far. We'll go through those one by one, and allow the panelists to discuss and share their insights on those questions. And we'll have a formal Q&A session at the end. In the meantime, as questions do come up, we will be able to you'll be able to take them or ask them rather in the question aspect, the question piece of the GoToWebinar software that's on your desktop. I have gotten a couple questions, just a little housekeeping about there was some noise on the line, a little bit of issues with the volume of the speakers. So, gentlemen, if while you're speaking, you can just make sure that you're speaking directly into whatever microphone you're using, be it Bluetooth, be it a headset or handset. We'll try and make sure that that we're as loud as we possibly can be. And with that, I will go on and start with the questions. So we broke this out into a series of aspects of choosing a colocation provider. And first things first was the initial planning steps, and kind of starting before you start, really. So the question that we have before us is, before I go to contact a service provider, before I even start that phase, what are some initial points to consider? And Mike Klein, this was actually a question that you and I spoke about briefly. So I'd love to start off with you, and then get the insights from the rest of the panel.
Terrific. So let's first off, let's make sure we're talking about the context and setting the context here. This is when you're starting to, before you reach out, talk to a service provider, you're talking about outsourcing some part of your IT infrastructure, right? So if you're looking at colocation, you're making, there's something that we typically see as a business driver that is causing an organization to look at, why should I outsource, or some part that they want to outsource from their IT infrastructure. It could be that they've got a new CIO who's taking a different perspective on how they're going to outsource. It could be that they've kind of hit their capacity from an internal constraints, and on the CapEx, they've got some CapEx considerations, or a big capital expenditure that's going to be required for them to go do it themselves. It can be a lot more cost-effective if they're going off and looking at their colocation providers from a colocation perspective of minimizing the capital and not needing to necessarily hire all the experts that it takes to run their IT infrastructure. So I think, one of the things that as we start talking to clients and prospects that are looking at doing colocation and looking at that are coming to us, one of the most important things is to really understand the business goals that you have. What are the business drivers? What is it that you're looking to accomplish from a business perspective? Because at the end of the day, if you can't sell the business drivers to the CEO and the CFO, it really doesn't make any sense to have a conversation about cloud or colocation. From that perspective, because the business drivers are going to be the ultimate decision maker on what and how you make that decision.
Thanks, Mike. This is Tim. I'll add in a few points that I think are often overlooked, and I would say in general, I think the really thinking through what your requirements are is one that most people do not spend enough time with. What we typically see is the need starts off with I know I need to do something with a colocation provider. I need to put so many racks. I need so much power. I need so much connectivity, and then the search process begins. And where we really see the advantage is when our clients think through ahead of time not only what their requirements are today, but what they're going to be over the life of the contract, whether that's a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year time frame. Are you going to be expanding during that period of time? Is additional space or power going to be important for you? Do you have flexibility on the location? And I know we'll talk about that a lot during the webinar this morning, but when it comes to location, there's a lot of aspects to consider. Probably one of the most important is what is the cost of power in a particular location, and if you have flexibility, you could choose a location that has a much lower cost of power. What other services are you going to need along the way? You may start off just requiring colocation, at the beginning, but do you need, potentially need, managed cloud or other types of services later on, and do you have a provider, that can touch on that? Do you want to deal with a local provider or, a national provider? How much redundancy in the data center provider, is important to you. And again, that's just, in my mind, a sample. But those are all the things that you would want to answer for yourself ahead of time and really, build a decision matrix. So when you, first off, when you start looking at providers, that criteria that you define can help you identify who you should be, speaking with to begin with. And then as you, start to work with the different providers, you can use that criteria as the evaluation points in making your ultimate selections with the providers that you're considering.
Excellent. And anybody else have anything to add before we move on?
My two cohorts covered that quite well.
Perfect. Beautiful. All right, the next question: what business goals should I be considering when planning to work with a co-location provider? Both Mike and Tim spoke about the business goals and kind of what I'm planning for. If you could kind of building that decision matrix, what sort of things should I be looking at when making my plans?
So let me start off because I started talking a little bit about the business requirements, and I think probably one of the most important decisions that a business has to make is to understand where their highest value add is in the organization. You kind of think of the IT stack and the delivery stack that goes everywhere from the electrical infrastructure on the bottom, where you're making sure you have always on power, all the way up to at the top of the stack, the user application. I think the key question is, where do you want to spend your resources, where do you want to spend your capital, and where do you want to spend your time, and what creates the greatest value add for the organization? So, for example, does it make sense for you to spend time, we call it the greasy stuff, right? The generators, the crack units, the air conditioning units, the making sure that perhaps your network is always up and that your network is secure? Or is it better and you create greater value if you're spending your time up in the application side, which probably more uniquely defines what is going on in your organization and the value that you add to your customers? And do you have the bench strength to be able to provide all of that, or is that part of that you want to outsource? So really kind of understanding, for example, I'll share an example of a client that we have that is a bank. Went through that whole process. They wanted to move in from a co-location perspective and get out of the basement where they were running their mainframe and a bunch of their servers. Came to us. We had a conversation about co-location, but at the end of the day, after months and months and months of trying to analyze where their greatest value add is, they decided to go with a cloud environment where they could basically have everything managed all the way up to the operating system. And that, what the biggest fear they faced was their IT staff trying to understand what was going to be different, or were they going to lose their jobs, let's be honest, because there are guys that were operating in hero mode. 3 o'clock in the morning, something would go off. They would have to go in and fix the system. Ta-da, they were a hero, but they wouldn't be awake during the working hours of the next day to get things done. By moving into a fully managed environment where they took advantage of kind of everything up to the operating system level, they were able to actually, they found out 6 months later nobody lost their job, and nobody was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to either address network issues, address problems that arose, rerun their backups that failed. And they were actually able and felt very comfortable after 6 months to say truly they were adding a lot more value to the organization by focusing on user applications rather than trying to make sure that their backups were rerun, for example, because they had a failure.
I think another thing you need to look at when you're talking about business goals and what to consider when planning to work with a co-location provider. As far as business goals go, what's your return on investment? You're considering going to co-location. And if you're a director of IT or you're a VP of IT, what do you expect as your return on that investment? Are you going to get man hours back? I think Mike touched on that a little bit, not having to get up at 3 in the morning and work all night until they're not there the next day. Start looking at what is your expected return on investment, and don't keep those a secret. Share those with your vendors, your co-location providers you're considering for service, and see if it is a fit. See if it's your expected return on investment is something that they can actually deliver on.
I think that's, Mike, that's an interesting point, because a lot of the conversation that we start having, kind of those business discussions, every organization is driven differently in the CapEx versus OpEx decision. And, understanding how their CFO thinks about capital or operating expenses and where they want to make the trade-off truly is unique by organization, industry by industry. And understanding that does lead to a lot of the drivers of how you're making those decisions, from co-location to cloud, and where you want to make that investment, or how you're looking to get your return on that investment.
Yeah, no, I think this is Tim. The last point that I'll add to both the points from the mic is, again, really thinking about it over the life of the contract that you're preparing to enter into, and certainly the shorter the contract, probably the less long-term consideration. But if you're looking at, a 3 or a 5-year contract that has any, of any size associated with it, you need to really spend the time on the business and have an understanding of what you expect to happen in the business over that period of time. And again, it could be, a transformation on services, similar to, what Mike was talking about, to the cloud, which is not uncommon today. As we work with clients, we see a lot of clients that may still be starting in the colocation environment, but if they haven't already started to move to the cloud, they fully expect to have at least some portion of their infrastructure in the cloud over a period of time. Or it could be having, greater diversity, in your footprint, where you might start with one, location today, but as your business expands, you need to consider both either a national, or an international footprint. And then one of the things that's often overlooked is, what's happening, not only to your core infrastructure, but what's going on with your applications inside of your, environment today. How are they going to be, transforming, over that same time frame, and what type of pressure or requirements is that going to put on your infrastructure? The more you can get a handle on that, the more that will help you, make not only a better decision, but give you more flexibility in the service providers that you choose to select to put your infrastructure in.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, if no one else has anything to add, we can move on to our next phase in finding the right provider, and what to look at when you're going through the process of choosing your provider.
Well, great. This is a.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say that maybe I'll kick this one off, and then let both mics look into it. Certainly there's a lot that goes into it beyond space and power. We've touched on it on a number of things to begin with. I think one of the things that I always think is important, is at the end of the day, do you trust the provider that you're going to be working with? Do you like the team that you're going to be working with? Either if it's a localized provider, do you like the leadership? Do you like the direction? If it's a larger national provider, the key resources that you're going to be working with, are you able to interact with that group of people effectively? And that's an area that's often overlooked. But when you start working with a service provider, particularly a co-location provider, when you're in and out of a given facility, often the local team can make a huge difference, not only on your experience working with them, but the overall quality of service that's delivered. And then you get into other items. Certainly, what's the reputation of the provider? How are they known in the industry? Again, the breadth and depth of services that they're able to provide for you. Are they both national or local? Again, a lot of other things beyond just where can I put my infrastructure.
I think Tim, you made a really good point in trying to separate it. There are some buyers that look at this as a commodity buy. It's a commodity decision, and then it comes down to price and the uptime, and a lot of these other factors don't really matter. And there are other buyers and there are other organizations that are really looking at this as a mission critical decision, and they have a whole set, all those things you talked about, trust, experience, partnership, really drive that decision much more than necessarily just it's a commodity buy of space, power, and network connectivity. A couple things that I think you should be thinking about, buyers should be thinking about as they're looking at this is, do they have compliance or security requirements? Because if you do, you get into a whole nother level of conversation. You need to be asking for audit reports. Does the provider deliver, if you're in healthcare, HIPAA audit reports? If you're in e-tail or touch and credit card information, PCI audit reports. Are they going to help you with the compliance that you need to accomplish if you need safe harbor or for Sarbanes-Oxley in the financial verticals. All those types of things, those start driving you into making different decisions than if you're just looking at it from a commodity basis. Another factor to think about is what set of services are you looking for? Are there, for example, do you want to have somebody take care of all your backups and make sure your backups are going off-site to a separate protected area, geographically separate area, than just being backed up in the data center or tapes being taken home at night? Do you have other managed services that you want to get out of them, somebody touching them or upgrading your servers or patching your servers or monitoring your servers? All those start really kind of are the requirements that start defining what you're looking for from a service provider that start going beyond that just ping power and pipe or space power and connectivity.
A lot of things I think you need to look at, and those are all good points, Mike. One thing that I think is pivotal is are they flexible? Especially now, since a lot of people are starting out colo, and over the next 3 to 5 years are going to be migrating to cloud. Well, if you've got a $5,000 a month spend locked in on your colocation, can you move that spend over to cloud? Or are you locked in? I got to pay that $5,000 in cloud for the next 3 years, or in colo for the next 3 years, even though I'm starting to use you for my cloud, and that's an extra spend, and I'm wasting money on my colo spend now. So flexibility in the contracting is pivotal. The other things I think people need to look at, there's a whole lot of people out there claiming we're a Tier 4 data center. Well, whenever I hear that, my BS flag goes up. There was only a handful of Tier 4 data centers in the entire country. Most of them are private data centers and not open to the public. So when you start seeing some, for lack of a more politically correct definition, gray area marketing, start questioning them on that. Absolutely start asking some questions.
So Tim, the company in Indianapolis has said they've created a Tier 6 data center. What about that one?
Oh yeah, well that's absolutely got to be the best in the world, right? And so start asking questions. A great question to ask when somebody says we're a Tier 4 data center is great. Let me see your certification from the Uptime Institute, and then see how fast they start backpedaling because they don't have it. And if they're lying about that, what else? What other smoke are they blowing your way? So look for honesty and integrity. A great way to determine that is most data centers, guys, things happen, and everybody's had an outage here and there. A lot of them claim we've never had an outage. That's a red flag to me. What I really want to see is, let me see your outage report. What did you do to remedy it so it'll never happen again? Are you sharing that kind of information with your clients? Those are things that I ask for as a requirement. I want to see that. I want to know that they're up front, that they're absolutely on my team working with me. I'll get off my pedestal now.
Good point.
Well, Mike, I like I like the term gray area marketing. I think that's one for the books there. But moving on to the next question, what should I consider when it comes to the physical location of the data center?
This is Tim. Let me kick this one off. I think for me, one of the first questions is when you look at physical location, again, comes down to the, what flexibility do you have as far as, where can it be? And the key driver there really does come down to the cost of power. We're headquartered here in California. In general, California is one of the most expensive states in the country from a power standpoint. I'm down in San Diego. San Diego is probably the most costly location in California for the cost of power. So if you don't have to be here, just by selecting a geographic location where there's a cheaper cost of power, can if you have any infrastructure of any size, can significantly save you on the ultimate contract. So I think that's always one of the first drivers, is asking the question is, do I have to have all my infrastructure right next to me? Now, in some cases the answer is yes, and there's a lot of valid reasons to do that. Other issues you want to look at when it comes to the physical location is certainly natural disaster tendencies. What's the level of risk, and how important is it to you? And some of it can even be, in submarkets. I've spent a lot of time, working in and around the Bay Area, and those of you that are familiar with that area know that, most of the data centers in the Bay Area are located in the West Bay, pretty much, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, San Jose. And one of the reasons behind that is a few. One of them actually tends to be the cheaper cost of power in that area. But another is, although the Bay Area certainly has a earthquake risk associated with it, that part of the Bay Area is one of the areas that has the lowest, seismic risk, in the greater Bay Area. Versus there was a data center that was built over in Fremont a number of years ago. It may still be there. I'm not sure it's being operated as a service provider, but that particular data center was actually built right on a fault, and it never took off because the risk, certainly there was very great. Beyond natural disasters, look at the other risks. Is it in the flight path? And again, it seems pretty obvious, but I've seen data centers that have been built, directly under the flight path, either the landing or the takeoff within, a very short distance, of the data center. That's certainly something, I would recommend that you try to avoid. What are the other, security setbacks, associated with it? Can the data center have a, secure perimeter? If you're in a downtown location, that may be hard to have a physical security, but are there barriers to the core infrastructure, i.e., can a car or a truck not just drive into, the generator yard and, potentially, take the data center offline? What connectivity exists, not only what's going to the data center, but what's nearby. Same with power. What power feeds exist, not only what's in the data center today, but what's nearby, and then, getting an idea of how stable, that infrastructure is. Is the site, is it a single tenant location or a multi-tenant location? If it's a multi-tenant location, is the infrastructure of the service provider completely isolated, from the other tenants, or is it shared? If it's shared, then the level of risk, associated with that, goes up because somebody else could do something that may potentially impact your infrastructure. Again, the amount of infrastructure you're considering putting in, the more infrastructure you're looking at, the more important, any of these questions probably comes as part of your decision process.
It's interesting, Tim, because I'm sitting in the state that has the lowest number of major natural disasters in the entire U.S. So the interesting, different perspective that we have in the Midwest kind of been the top list of constraints or concerns that you have in California. And again, power is another one, right? So we don't see that coming into play as often, especially when we work a lot with mid-market companies. So companies that want to do 100, 200, 500 square feet of cabinet space. I think when you're looking at half a megawatt of power, absolutely cost becomes a major consideration. But probably the biggest driver that we see is actually how close it is to the people that are going to be working there. Because when you're talking about co-location, different than cloud, right? Because cloud is pretty much, you can turn it over and manage it anywhere in the world or anywhere in the country to get cloud access. But when you're talking about co-location, it typically involves people that want to get close to their servers, the server huggers, or however you want to call it, where they want to basically get in and manage and touch and do all the work on their servers. And so the larger the installation, the more likely we're going to have more people driving back and forth to that location. So we've seen proximity actually being a really key, proximity to the IT people being a key factor. And then the second factor, when they're talking about physical location, is geographic separation when it comes to disaster recovery. We want to have an environment that's close enough to get to in a reasonable period of time. 9/11 kind of changed the world when people think about, well, I'll have a data center in Baltimore and a data center in Phoenix. Well, you can't count now that you can just hop on a plane and get to your disaster recovery data center if it's 1,000, 2,000 miles away. So that geo-separation between your production environment and your DR environment is another key factor that we see coming up in a lot of decisions when people are looking at physical location of their data center.
I want to jump in and just drive the point home on what Tim was talking about, power costs. He's right. The West Coast, San Diego area, you're paying between 14 and 16 cents per kilowatt hour, versus the Midwest, you're around 8 cents. There's other parts of the country that are less. So it can be a huge. It can be a I often tell people in San Diego, well, go to Vegas, your colo is free, because what they save in power cost pays for the colo. So it's a very big number. The other physical thing to consider, and is often overlooked, is how much power is available to the data center. Okay, they're hooked up now. Maybe they've got 2 megawatts worth of generator capacity, but they max out their feed, and can they get more if they max the speed out? It's obviously not that big a deal if you're looking at a center that's at 90% capacity. They're not going to grow that much. But let's say they're at 50% capacity, and they're nearing saturation on their current generators. How much more power will the power company give them? That's something a lot of people never ask. It can really come back to bite you in the rear end.
Good points, Mike.
You guys kind of wrapped into the next question, which is, should I work with a local or a national data center or a national service provider? I'd like to actually edit that question a little bit based on the question that we got, is to the point of high costs. Why would I need to work with a local infrastructure provider despite high costs? What are some of those factors that I should be thinking about?
I'm going to jump in here on this one and get it kicked off. You're going to get a lot more love from a local provider. A local provider is, especially if you're that company that's getting anywhere from say 2 to 10 cabinets. You're not going to like the radar screen of a Savvis or a QTS or some of these larger companies. You'll have a great honeymoon, and it'll be a good buying experience, and you'll sign on the dotted line. But when the chips are down, you're not a large enough spend. I know that sounds brutal, but that's the reality. With a local provider, you're going to get a lot more love. You're going to get a lot more help. You're going to get a lot more time spent with you to develop a strategy for your deployment and cost-saving measures. They're going to spend the time with you to make sure that it's done right, and they're going to plan your growth with you going forward. You're not going to get that with a larger provider.
Yeah,
it's not that kind of spend.
You're right, Mike. I mean, that's a big fish, small fish question, right? Do you want to be
Absolutely.
a big fish in a small pond, or do you want to be a small fish in a big pond? And what level of service are you looking for? What level of, do you want to be able to pick up the phone, have a conversation with somebody that you know, that you trust, or do you want to just have somebody there that when they pick up the phone, yes, somebody on the staff is going to take care of you, but it's not a relationship. It's just, you're just the customer.
Yeah, and I think I'll add a couple of points. And this is one of those questions where it's the great "it depends" answer. And I think some of it goes back to what we were speaking about at the beginning, where getting a good understanding of what you're looking for and what your decision criteria is and what your requirements are can drive you in potentially in one direction or the other. Certainly, the large national providers, they have recognized brands which may be important to you. They have typically they have a large set of services available. Most of them, just by geographic locations, have multiple footprints, which for some clients can be incredibly important. But on the negative side, I think we've heard some of this already, typically they have less flexibility in their price point, so they tend to be on the higher side. Although you may have relationships with the local team, which could be fine, you often don't have relationships with the senior team, and you tend not to get the amount of flexibility from a national provider, because for them, the more flexibility they build into their model, the greater the costs that they have to incur, because they have to deal with whatever they do for you potentially for someone else, and standardization helps them keep their costs down. Flexibility or customization drives their costs up. I think we hit a lot of good points already on the local providers. You have that flexibility, you have the relationship, not only with the people potentially in the data center, but often with the senior, leadership of the company. They get to know you better. They understand what your requirements are. They often, are limited on their locations on the con side. They may not have the financial stability of some of these larger companies, and sometimes they don't have the scale, that you're looking for. Both can do a very good job for you as an end user. We've got plenty of examples of really solid service providers on both sides of the equation. It really comes down to knowing what you're looking for, knowing what the best fit is going to be for you at that point, not only at this point in time, but over the life of the service contract.
Excellent, excellent. So moving on into touring a facility and during an initial tour and initial contact with a provider. And Mike, Klein, again, this is one of the things that you and I talked about, and I'm interested in kind of hearing from your perspective. What are the top 5 things that I should be looking for when I'm visiting a facility?
It's going to be, my list is going to be kind of funny because it's probably not going to be, look at the size of the generators, look at how the crack units are put together. But, the things I would actually point to is look for cleanliness. Look at the wiring and the cable. Look at how, to me, those are indicators. Is this a process-driven, client-focused organization where they're really putting out and making sure they're taking care of the details? Because the details matter in the data center business. They matter in the hosting business. Missing a detail can mean the difference between 100% uptime and having a 5-hour outage, right? And so I look for, when we're going in, we're talking to partners, we're looking at other places, I really, pay attention to the details. And is it clean? How do they wire? Do they have a whole bunch of wires just sticking out? If you look underneath the raised floor, if you look in the cabling that's going above, how are the wires laid out? Is everything neat? Is it organized? Is it easy to track down if they have an issue going on, that they can find their way through that? Or is it a whole, rat's nest of wires that are out there and it's not very well maintained or kept clean? It doesn't take much for a small rodent to get in and start chewing through some cables in your raised floor. You're not paying attention to those details, and all of a sudden you got a bunch of issues there. So I look at the details as being really something. Is this company, is the provider paying attention to the process? Another one that's going to sound kind of funny is ask to see the generators. You'd be amazed at the number of providers, especially on the lower end of the marketplace, that claim they have a generator, they claim they have N+1 generators, or that they're running a high-tier data center, but they don't really have them, or they only have one, and they kind of try to skate around those issues. So you really do want to see all the components that make up and comprise the infrastructure that you need to see. And then the last thing I'd put, I'm only going to give 4 here because I want to make sure we're paying attention to time here, but go in the knock and ask to talk to the people. See what the people that are actually taking care of your equipment, taking care of the data center, that are monitoring your data center. Talk to them and get a feeling for the organization, get a feeling for the culture, get a feeling for how customer service focused they are. Are they just staring at their monitors, they don't want to talk to you, or are they happy to share their experience? I think those give you a pretty good clue of what's really going on in that organization and how they will be to work with as a service provider.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Mike said, and I would just add a couple of others and maybe highlight one point. First off, absolutely observe, physical, security, as you're walking into the facility, as well as a process, for getting badged, into the facility. Does it seem like the folks are following a standardized, process, or do they appear to be making it up, as they go? Again, the more process on the physical security side, the better. Beforehand, ask to see, or even most of them posted on the website, what the policies are for, basically customers in, the data centers, and what those points are. And then as you go in the data center, look to see if they're following them. One of my pet peeves, as it should be for, every real, serious data center operator, is look for the amount of cardboard, if any, and there should be none that's on the raised floor. And there should be none, both from a contamination standpoint as well as a fire danger. But I see plenty of operators of all sizes that have way too much cardboard up on the raised floor. Look at what they're doing particularly from a cooling standpoint. Are they using backing plates in the environment and enforcing the use of backing plates or not. That equates to potentially added costs in the facilities. And Mike hit on one point, but I really think it's something good to do, and most people don't do it. If it's a raised floor environment, ask them to pull a tile and look under the raised floor. And what you're looking for is, is it reasonably clean under there? Are the wires that are run under the raised floor, do they appear to be run in a logical manner, or is it just spaghetti down there? Both those points will tell you a lot about the the practices of the data center and how they're operated, which will equate to whether it's going to be a reliable site for you or potentially cause having a lot of problems.
Two things I'd like to throw in, and I agree with everything that both Mike and Tim have said. Especially, absolutely pull that tile, and if you can, you pick the tile. A lot of operators will have a section of their raised floor that's just spotless, but the rest of it looks like junk, so you pick the tile. The other thing I always ask to see, even if you're not an electrician and you can't read it, ask to see the electrical one line. You'd be surprised how many data centers out there that were just pieced together. They don't have an electrical one line, which is their blueprint for their electrical system. You would think that would be pivotal, and it is, especially if they're going to do any retrofits or anything of that nature. So ask to see the one line. Also ask and read their, everybody's claiming that they have the SSA 16 Type 2 audits. A lot of them won't let you take them with you, which is fine, but you're there, they should be able to put it in front of you so you can read it and actually and get a good feel of are they actually doing what they say they're doing.
Excellent, excellent. Mike Vignato, you kind of brought up the kind of BS marketing buzzwords that to watch for, and one of them kind of hit really well onto the next slide here. And so how important, you mentioned the tier class of a data center and talking about we're tier 4 data center, tier 6 data center. How important is the tier class of a data center?
Well, if it's done right, you're going. If you're talking about the Uptime Institute with their tier classifications, and that's what most people are referencing. And they'll say they're a tier 3 or they're a tier 4, and I've heard tier 3 plus out there. To me, they're important because they instill confidence in the buyer as long as it is actually audited. Okay, don't say you're a tier whatever if you haven't done the audit. And you hear quite often that the audits are too expensive. Well, they run $100 grand-ish. In the grand scheme of things, depending on your data center, not a huge amount of money. Now, you can be a rock-solid data center without having done the tier certification with the Uptime Institute. You just, as a buyer, need to have them walk you through it, have them walk you through their blueprint, show that there's no single points of failure, show you how it's concurrently maintainable. And that's eminently achievable without the Uptime Institute giving you a certification. But I guess what I stress is don't buy into the hype. Don't let somebody tell you it's a tier 3 and just walk away. Ask that second question. Tier 3 by whose standard? Who audited you to give you that tier 3? And if they were self-audited, then have them walk you through the electrical one line. Have them walk them through. Have them back up what they just said.
Yeah, and I would add, when you're talking about the tier class of the data center, you're really talking about the level of redundancy and reliability that are built into the core architecture. I would say, if you went out and you looked at the service provider community, probably the largest number of service providers out there have, what would be considered, tier 3 data centers that tend to be concurrently maintainable and have at least an N+1 and in some cases a 2N level of infrastructure. However, I've seen many data centers that would fall into the tier 2 category, or even tier 2 plus, meaning that they might make a few compromises, but are very solid data centers. And then on the higher end, there are certainly service providers out there, although there are a select number that have a much higher level of availability in the tier 4. So I think that the big thing to consider, beyond, as Mike said, is there are some providers that every data center they have is a Tier 4 data center, which definitely goes into the BS category. Is getting an understanding of what level of architecture that's in place. Is that going to support your requirements long term for your infrastructure availability and reliability, and also recognize that typically the higher the tier of the data center will have an impact on your price point. If you're truly going into a Tier 4 data center, you can expect that price point is going to be higher than if you're going into a Tier 2 data center. On the other hand, if you're able to accept the limitations of a Tier 2 data center from an infrastructure standpoint, often you can, or I shouldn't say often, you can expect to see much better pricing in that type of facility. The last point I'll make on this, I don't want to hammer it, is keep in mind, although architecture is important to preventing outages in data centers, the single largest cause of outages in data centers are still human related. So that really gets down to, if you want reliability in your data center, you need to look at how your service provider is operating. It comes down to the people, their training, and the processes they're following, because you can have Tier 4 architecture, but if they're not operating it correctly, there's still going to be an impact in there.
Well, Tim, you couldn't be more right. The number one cause of issues is human. We still have humans that are running these data centers, right? And that's why I always say, ask for the audit report. Nobody would go out and buy, most people won't go out and buy a used car without getting a Carfax to understand what they're buying. How can you go off and go to a colocation provider, a cloud provider, and it's a long-term trusted relationship, you're putting your IT in there, and not get the audit report? I disagree with you, Tim, when you with Mike. I mean, when you said that they should be, they should be able to show it to you. They should provide it to you under non-disclosure. You're making a big decision, and whether it's SSA 16 is pretty low bar today, because there's usually most SSA 16 audit reports I've seen have 8 to 10 to maybe 12 control criteria. Get a SOC 2. It should have 150 plus control criteria. Ask them if they're conforming and get their SOC 2 audit report. If you're in healthcare, get their HIPAA audit report. If you're really concerned about security, get their PCI audit report and understand how they're securing credit card, because it's one of the highest bars that are out there. And that's the thing that really tells you, do they have processes? Are there people following the processes? Because it's audited on a regular basis, and have they qualified and passed those audits throughout the year on a continuous basis? That's the way to really address that people issue, which I think you're right, Tim, is probably a far bigger concern than the actual tier of the data center.
Excellent, excellent. Now, we did have a question come up here. Just give me 1 second, though. Of course, here we go. Actually, we had a couple questions come up. First things first, can you replace the people in your data center with robots and a series of PowerShell scripts?
Sometimes I wish we could.
There's actually different business. It's a good question, because there's actually different business models that are out there. So if you want to look at somebody who's done a lot of automation really made the system very, very automated, look at Amazon, right? What Amazon has done, they're playing more in the non-mission critical market than they are in the mission critical market for media and gaming and things like that, DevOps, and if you're doing development systems. But what you get is a very low touch, low support environment. Try to get somebody from Amazon on the phone to walk through your issue. It's not going to happen, right? But they have really forced and are playing in that commodity, public cloud, highly automated market. You can do everything online. In fact, they want you to do everything online, and you're not getting a high-touch experience. On the other side, if you want a high-touch experience, if you want somebody, you want to talk to the experts, you want to be able to know what's going on, you want some advice on how to do things, you want to draw on the people that are there, then that's going to a fully automated system with all bots and nobody there at the controls that you can actually talk to is the antithesis of a high-touch business, the antithesis of what companies, at least like online tech, are trying to drive. So I think there are clearly different business models that different cloud providers are trying to deliver, and co-location, is a lower touch model as well, depending on the managed services that you need. But I think that's a good decision criteria that as you're looking at your co-location or your cloud provider is how much touch do you want, how much touch do you need, how much do you really want to, with the trust you're putting in the relationship, how much do you want to actually be able to access the real people that are doing the job?
Yeah, I would just add, there's an old adage, in the data center industry that the best operated data center was one that had one man and one dog. The dog was there to keep all the people out, and the man was there to feed the dog, and that was the best operated. So, but seriously, one thing I would add to Mike's comment, particularly when you think about service providers and you get to automation, and I'm a huge fan of automation. When you start talking about the people, the more standardized you can make a model, then the greater the likelihood that you can drive towards automation, particularly even something like robotics in that model. Standardization, particularly at the data center level, tends to favor more of the a large, like a Yahoo or a Google or somebody like that can purpose-built the data center for the use that they have in mind. When you get into the service provider community, particularly when you're with a co-location provider, you have a large set of customers that are in there that often have varying types of uses, and the service providers need to basically cater, if you will, or be able to respond. Cater is probably not the best word, but respond to that wide set of use cases that exist within their data center. And I think we're still not at the point where we could get to the having robotics completely take over a service provider data center. Although with that said, there is more and more automation that's coming into data centers all the time, and perhaps that someday we will be there.
Good question.
So we have another question here. I've been approached by data center brokers. Do they provide value to my evaluation and contracting process?
That's an interesting question. Do you want the politically correct answer, or do you want the? It depends on. So I think there's a couple of there's a number of different brokers out there. There are some that are doing kind of honeypots to the website, where they are literally going out and they are shopping more on the commodity side, right? We get these on the other end of it, where they're going out and they're sending this out, and they're saying, hey, I got a bid out here, and here are the requirements, and they're sending out to 5 or 6 or 10 different providers, seeing who's going to come back, and it's typically it's a price piece, because you can't, all these things we talked about is, what do you look at when you come to the data center? How do you have these conversations? None of those conversations are going out. It's just a price shopping exercise. If you're a commodity buyer and you're just looking at price and all these other factors we talked about aren't an issue, then going out and either having a broker or just price shopping and putting out an RFP on price is one way to do that. Now, recognize that when you have a broker, they're always, just like anything else, they're getting a commission. They're just getting a commission from the seller in this case. And so the question you have to ask is, can you negotiate a better deal yourself, or are you getting value out of that person doing the shopping for you? But typically what you're not going to get from the broker is somebody, and this isn't true of all brokers, but are they able to go in and actually uniquely understand your requirements and match you up with the best provider that goes beyond just price? I think that's the difficult.
Yeah, and I would add just to what Mike said, because I think the key comes down to is what additional value can they bring to the table. And there's certainly, I would say, brokers probably in the sense of being used definitely have a place in the sector, and I know many that add a high degree of value to their clients, both from the evaluation as well as the decision process, and even helping make sure that the ongoing contract, the T's and C's and the overall support requirements are being lived up to. I think those are certainly the types of people that I would encourage you to seek out and have relationships with. On the other side of it, there are folks that are simply doing what Mike said, which is looking to shop the price and want to represent you on that. They really don't have a whole lot of value add that they can bring to the table other than helping you facilitate the price shopping. And we've seen, particularly over the recent years, we've seen a lot of the old the telecom brokers who have morphed into both representing colocation as well as representing cloud. And in a number of examples that I know of, many of those folks unfortunately really don't have a high level of understanding of what they're doing, and it's just a price shopping exercise that they're helping you with.
I'll jump in as well. It's kind of disagreeing with Mike and Tim. There are some brokers out there. I mean, I've helped clients in the past do this as well. If you get a broker out there that really understands the industry, it wasn't just a telco sales guy for 3 years and decided to strike out on his own, but somebody that really understands the data center industry from an operational standpoint. They can bring a tremendous value to the table, but you got to make sure that they're asking you the right business questions, that they're not just shopping for price. They really want to investigate your needs with you, and then they're going to take you out to show you some data centers that they know well, and that they're the ones that are taking the responsibility to do a lot of the due diligence as far as the operation of the data center is concerned. That kind of broker will add a tremendous amount of value. Somebody who's just a price hack, well, probably not a whole lot of value there.
Excellent. Actually, that leads pretty well into one more question that we have here before a quick Q&A, and I do want to be aware of time. But our last question is: once it comes to contract negotiation, what types of terms should I be considering?
We saved the easiest one for last.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well, I'll just jump in real quick, and I'll let Mike and Mike get out. First off, I think one of the keys is understanding what's the length of the contract you're looking at. It's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years that you're considering. Certainly, I would spend a lot of time not only looking at the SLAs in the contracts, but the penalties associated with them, and this is often a good one to spend some time on a spreadsheet and get an understanding of how much skin in the game the service provider really has. In some cases, the SLAs sound pretty good, but when you look at if they have a failure, what they actually have to pay as a result of that can be relatively small. So you want to understand that. Certainly looking at what are the out clauses associated with it, particularly early termination fees. How is that going to be calculated? Things do change. You may go into a multi-year contract with the best of intentions, and then something happens along the way. You may have to consider termination. Most providers will you can terminate, but they will you'll have some financial commitment. It could be the full commitment for the life of the contract. Others may vary on that. Are there any escalators in place? Certainly understanding the limitations of liability, clause is an important one that, often can be overlooked. And then, overall, is there flexibility in the contract at all, or is it relatively rigid? Number of providers today, particularly ones that have multiple locations and multiple services, will let you flex your locations and your services as long as you you don't vary your spend. Others are pretty strict on you entered in a contract for these services at this price, and any variation to it is going to have some type of change fee associated with it. So really understanding the T's and C's and what's in there is important for you.
I concur with Tim especially on remedies on the SLA. I have seen some out there that 8-hour outage, here's your $38.75. I mean, what are the teeth in the remedies? You've absolutely got to check that out. The other thing I would mention, this is my personal belief, I will never sign a colocation contract that has an auto-renew for the same term. And I've seen so many of them that if you don't notify them 60 days before the contract expires, it automatically renews for another 3 years and just bites people in the rear end. Make sure you look at the auto renewal clause. I encourage that it automatically renews to a month-to-month. That's okay. Just do not do one that automatically renews the same term.
Well, you guys took all the good ones. The last one, so I'll just throw in one other piece, is just to understand the termination fees. Some providers require you to live out the length of the contract. Others give you the opportunity with a 6-month out, so you pay a termination fee that's equal to 6 months or the remainder of the contract, whichever is less. And that can provide you a little bit more flexibility than if you're locked in for a full 3 years with no out whatsoever. So that's another thing to look at and consider.
Excellent. And I have a feeling that we could do an entirely a whole nother webinar just on negotiating contracts for co-location providers.
I don't want to give everybody all the tricks for doing it.
Excellent, excellent. But gentlemen, with that, we are at time. It is 11 o'clock, and like we said, we wanted to make sure that we're respectful of people's time. So we do want to say thank you, and I would like to thank our panelists once again, Tim, Mike, and Mike. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and sharing your vast industry experience with us as we go through. There were some questions that we weren't able to answer. I do apologize for that, but I'll make sure that we get the questions written down, and we'll get follow-up emails sent out. We'll get all the information along with the questions that weren't answered and the answers to them, and recording of the webinar as well. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, and we will look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, everyone.